The elevator doors opened onto the 11th floor of Cho Enterprises at 11 at night, and Maya Whitfield was still at her desk because the quarterly filings would not sort themselves. She heard the doors before she saw them, a soft mechanical exhale down the hallway behind reception, and she assumed it was building maintenance again, the same tired hinge that had been complaining for weeks. She did not look up from the spreadsheet glowing on her monitor. She had learned in the 8 months she had worked as private secretary to Tae-min Cho that the office kept strange hours, that men in dark suits came and went without appointments, that she was paid extraordinarily well to notice everything and ask nothing. Tonight she noticed the sound was wrong. Too many footsteps. Too fast for a cleaning crew. By the time she stood, 3 men were already through the glass doors of the outer office, and the first thing she registered was that none of them worked here. She knew every face on this floor, every badge, every rhythm of who belonged and who did not, and these men did not belong. One of them had a tattoo curling up from his collar that she had never seen on any of Tae-min's people. He looked at her the way a man looks at an obstacle, not a person, and that was when she understood this was not a break-in. This was an arrival with intent. She reached for the desk phone, and the nearest man crossed the room faster than she thought a person his size could move. She threw the stapler at him without thinking, a reflex more than a strategy, and it caught him in the jaw hard enough to make him swear. It bought her exactly the half-second she needed to get around the desk and into the narrow hallway that led toward the private offices, the one place in the building she knew better than anyone because she was the one who walked it 40 times a day carrying files no one else was allowed to touch. She did not scream. She had read once, in a life that felt very far away now, that screaming wastes air you need for running, and some stubborn part of her brain filed that fact away and used it tonight. She ran instead, past the closed door of Tae-min's office, which was empty because he was 2 buildings away at a dinner she had scheduled for him herself, and into the records room where the fire door led down a service stairwell only 3 people had keys to. Her hand shook badly enough that the key scraped twice against the lock before it caught. Behind her, something shattered. A vase, maybe, or a monitor. She did not turn around to find out. She went down the stairwell 2 steps at a time, one hand on the rail, the other pressed against her ribs where she had wrenched something scrambling around the desk, and she did not stop until she was 3 floors down and could hear nothing behind her but her own breathing. She waited in the stairwell for 11 minutes by the clock on her phone before she was sure no one was following. Then she called security, and then, because the fear had not left her hands yet, and because 8 months of instinct told her this was not a call for the front desk, she called the only number that had ever mattered in that building. She called Tae-min Cho directly. On the line, he had given her the first week and told her to use only if something was wrong enough that waiting would cost something. He answered on the second ring. She heard the sound of a restaurant behind him, glasses and low conversation, and then she heard it go silent, as if he had walked out of the room the instant her name appeared on his screen. Her voice cracked once, just once, saying his name, and then she told him what happened in short, flat sentences, because that was the only way she could get the words out without her throat closing. 3 men. The office. She did not know who. She was safe now, she said. She was in the stairwell. Security was coming. He asked her exactly 4 questions. Was she hurt? Where exactly was she standing? Had she seen their faces? Was anyone else in the building? She answered each one without embellishment, and when she finished he said only 2 words before he hung up, and they were not comforting words, they were a promise stated as fact. I am coming. Security found her 9 minutes later, and by then the men were gone, vanished the way people who do this professionally vanish, leaving behind a wrecked reception desk and a shattered monitor, and nothing else that would help anyone identify them. The building's own doctor looked at her wrist, which she had twisted badly on the stairs, and told her it needed an actual hospital, not an ice pack from the break room. She agreed to go because arguing took energy she did not have left, and because some part of her, the part that had just run for her life down 11 flights of stairs, wanted to be somewhere with lights that did not flicker and people who were not trying to hurt her. The ambulance was unnecessary, she insisted, and a co-worker drove her instead, and she sat in the passenger seat pressing her sleeve against a cut above her eyebrow that would not stop stinging, watching Seoul slide by in streaks of red and white light, and thinking, absurdly, that she still had not finished the filings. The emergency department at 2 in the morning had a particular kind of quiet, the fluorescent hum of a place that never fully closes, but slows to something like a held breath after midnight. Maya sat on the edge of a hospital bed with her arm in a temporary sling, a nurse taping gauze over the cut on her cheekbone, and she kept running the numbers of the night over and over in her head as if repetition could make sense of them. 2 police officers stood near the curtain taking her statement, one of them writing while the other asked questions in the careful, procedural tone that made everything sound smaller than it had felt in the moment. She was in the middle of describing the tattoo on the second man's neck when the automatic doors at the end of the hallway opened, and she felt it before she saw it, the way the air in a room changes when someone with real weight walks into it. Tae-min Cho came through the emergency department in a charcoal suit that had clearly been thrown on over a dinner shirt, no tie, the top button of his collar undone, and he did not look at the nurses or the vending machines or anything else. He looked at her, and for 1 second, before his expression closed back into its usual composure, she saw something in his face that she had never seen there before in 8 months of working 12 feet from his office door. It looked almost like fear. He crossed the room in a straight line, and the 2 police officers instinctively stepped back half a pace, the way people did around him without quite understanding why. He did not sit. He stood at the foot of her bed with his hands loose at his sides, and his eyes moved over her the way a man reads a document for a single dangerous error. The sling, the gauze, the shallow scrape along her jaw, cataloging damage. "You said slight injuries," he said. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it, something pulled taut. "I'm fine," she said, and heard how unconvincing it sounded even to herself. He did not answer that. He turned instead to the officers, and his tone shifted into something crisp and businesslike, the register she recognized from board meetings, the one that ended arguments before they started. He asked what had been recovered from the scene, what descriptions had been given, whether the building's security footage had already been pulled. The younger officer answered readily, almost eager to be useful to him, and Maya watched with a strange detachment as the entire emergency department seemed to reorganize itself around one man's presence without him raising his voice once. When the officers finished and stepped away to file their report, he finally sat, not in the chair but on the edge of the bed itself, close enough that she could smell cedar and something warmer underneath it, and he studied her face for a long moment before he spoke again. "Who called it in?" he asked. "The attack. Was it time to when you would be alone?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "I was the only one still working that late. Everyone else left around 9. His jaw tightened just slightly, a muscle moving under skin. "That's not a coincidence," he said, more to himself than to her. She wanted to ask him who those men were, who would send 3 strangers into his office in the middle of the night, but something in his face told her this was not the moment, that whatever answer he had was not one he intended to give her here, under fluorescent lights, with a nurse 3 feet away restocking gauze. Instead, she asked the only question that felt urgent enough to say out loud. "Are you in danger too?" He looked at her for a beat too long before he answered. "I am always in danger, Maya. Tonight it found its way to you instead of me. That is the part one cannot undo." There was something in the way he said her name, not the clipped, professional way he used it in the office when he needed a document by 9, but slower, deliberate, like he was setting it down carefully somewhere. She noticed it and told herself she was imagining things, that adrenaline made people hear meaning where there was none. A doctor came to review her chart, confirmed the wrist was sprained rather than broken, told her to keep the sling for a week and follow up if the swelling did not go down. Tae-min listened to every word as though he intended to enforce it personally. When the doctor left, he stood, buttoned his jacket, and said the sentence that would end up rearranging the rest of her week without her having any real say in it. "You're not going back to your apartment tonight. I have to feed my—" "You don't have a cat," he said. "I've been to your apartment file for insurance purposes. You live alone. No pets, no roommate, no one to check on you if something happens at 3 in the morning. You're coming to the house." It wasn't posed as a question, and something about the certainty of it, the flat refusal to negotiate, should have irritated her more than it did. Instead, she found herself too tired to argue, too aware that whoever had come through that office tonight now knew her face, her habits, possibly her address. She nodded once, And he seemed to take that as the only answer that mattered, because he was already reaching for his phone to arrange the car before she had finished the motion. The car that took them out of the city was black and unmarked, driven by a man Taemin called Do-Yun, who nodded once at Maya in the rearview mirror and said nothing else for the entire ride. She sat with her sling resting in her lap, watching Seoul thin out into hills and then trees and then a long private road lined with security cameras disguised as garden lights, and beside her Taemin sat with his phone in one hand, reading messages that made his expression harden by degrees, though he never once let his voice slip when he spoke to whoever was on the other end. She caught fragments. A name she did not recognize. The word territory said the way other people said mortgage or rent, like it was a weight he carried every day without complaint because complaint had never once solved anything for him. At one point he said, quietly and without heat, find out who authorized it, and something about the calm in his voice frightened her more than shouting would have. You don't have to explain any of this to me, she said, when he finally set the phone face down on his knee. I know, he said. But you're sitting in my car at 3 a.m. because of it, so I think you've earned a little more than nothing. The house, when they arrived, was not what she expected. She had imagined something ostentatious, all marble and gold the way movies taught people to imagine wealth like his, but the mansion sat low and dark against the hillside, more stone than glass, more restraint than display. A woman in her 50s met them at the door, introduced simply as Mrs. On, who took one look at Maya's sling and the state of her blazer and disappeared without being asked, returning minutes later with a folded set of clothes, tea, and a look that suggested she had done this kind of quiet, competent triage before for other people in other emergencies. Taemin showed her to a guest room himself, which she suspected was not his habit, given the careful way he opened doors as though unsure of the correct etiquette for hosting someone who was neither a business partner nor family. The room was simple and warm, a bed already made, a lamp already on, as if someone had prepared it before they'd even left the hospital. You had this ready, she said. I called ahead, he said. It seemed like tonight required it. She sat on the edge of the bed once he left, exhaustion pulling at her in slow waves, and found she could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the tattoo on the man's neck, the stapler leaving her hand, the long stairwell stretching down and down. She gave up around 4 and wandered out into the hallway in Mrs. On's borrowed sweatshirt, following a thin line of light toward what she assumed was a study. Taemin was still awake, sitting behind a desk with his jacket discarded over the back of a chair, sleeves rolled to the forearm, a glass of something amber and untouched beside a folder of documents he was reading with the focus of a man who had forgotten what hour it was. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and for a moment neither of them said anything.
Can't sleep, he said.
It wasn't really a question.
No, she admitted.
He gestured to the chair across from the desk, and she took it, curling her feet up under her despite the sling, and for a while they simply sat there, the study lit only by a single lamp and the blue glow of a security monitor built discreetly into the wall behind him, showing quiet footage of the property's perimeter. Nothing moving, nothing wrong. You've worked for me 8 months, he said eventually, without looking up from the folder. Do you know what I actually do, Maya? I know what the letterhead says, she said carefully. I know what I'm not supposed to ask about. He almost smiled at that, the corner of his mouth moving in a way she had catalogued exactly twice before in 8 months, both times over something that surprised him.
Diplomatic, he said.
Good instinct. It's part of why I hired you. I thought you hired me because I type 90 words a minute and don't gossip, she said, and this time he did smile, briefly, like a light switched on and off before anyone could be sure they'd seen it. That too, he said. But mostly because you don't flinch. I watched you handle 3 board members trying to bully you out of a meeting room in your second week, and you didn't blink once. I don't forget things like that. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and the silence that followed was not uncomfortable the way she expected silence with him to be. It felt, instead, like something being built between them one careful board at a time. Get some rest, he said finally, closing the folder. Whatever comes tomorrow, you'll want to have slept. What is coming tomorrow? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment, weighing, she thought, how much of the truth she could carry tonight. A war I thought I'd already won, he said quietly. It seems I was wrong. Morning arrived with sunlight cutting sharp lines across the guest room floor, and Maya woke disoriented, momentarily certain she was still at her apartment before the sling on her wrist reminded her otherwise. Mrs. An had left a fresh set of clothes outside the door sometime before dawn. Simple, well-fitted, clearly chosen with more attention than a stranger should have had time for. She dressed slowly, favoring her wrist, and found her way down to a kitchen that smelled like rice and something grilled, where Taemin sat at the counter already dressed for the day, reading something on a tablet with the particular stillness of a man absorbing bad news without letting his face show it. He glanced up when she entered.
"You slept," he said.
It wasn't a question, but there was something like relief underneath it. "Eventually," she said, sliding onto the stool across from him. "What's that?" He turned the tablet toward her, though he did not explain right away. It showed security stills, grainy but clear enough. 3 men crossing a parking structure she recognized instantly as the one beneath her office building. "Do you recognize any of them?" he asked. She studied the images carefully. "The one with the tattoo," she said, pointing. "He's the one who came at me first." Taemin nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already suspected.
"His name is Han Suk-jin," he said.
"He works for a man named Park Yong-soo. We had an arrangement with his organization 11 years ago. It ended badly." "How badly?" she asked. "Badly enough that I assumed it was finished," he said. "I was wrong. This wasn't a robbery, Maya. This was a message, and it was sent to the wrong person." She felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear exactly, something closer to comprehension.
"They were looking for you," she said.
"And I was just there. That's the version I want to be true," he said, and something in his voice made her look up sharply. "But there's another possibility I have to consider. That they knew exactly who you were, and they wanted me to know it too." She set down the water glass she'd been holding. "Why would anyone care about a secretary?" she said, and the moment she said it she heard how small the words sounded next to the size of what had happened to her last night. "Because you're not just anyone to me," he said, and then, as though he'd said more than he intended, he looked back down at the tablet and changed the subject with the brisk efficiency of a man closing a door before anyone could see inside the room. He told her, in pieces over the rest of that morning, about a man named Park Yong-soo who had once controlled the docks along a stretch of the Han River that Taemin's organization had wanted for a decade, about an agreement made and later broken, about a brother, his own, named Jun-ho, who had been the one to negotiate the original deal and had paid for its collapse with more than just money. He did not say exactly what Jun-ho had paid, and she did not ask, sensing that the answer sat somewhere behind the flatness in his eyes whenever the name came up. "My brother trusted the wrong man," he said finally, standing at the window with his back to her, looking out over the hillside grounds where 2 men in dark jackets now walked slow, deliberate circuits along the tree line. Park convinced him a partnership was possible, that old grudges could be set aside. Jun-ho believed him. "I told him not to. He didn't listen, and it cost him everything he had, and it nearly cost the family the entire territory north of the river." "Is he all right?" she asked quietly. "Your brother. He's alive," Taemin said, in a tone that made clear the sentence contained an entire history he had no intention of unpacking further. "That's the best answer I have for you." She wanted to reach for him then, an instinct she didn't fully understand, born from watching the careful control in his shoulders and recognizing, somewhere underneath 8 months of professional distance, that this was a man who had built an empire out of never letting anyone see him need something. She didn't move. It felt like the wrong moment to test a door that hadn't been offered yet. Instead, she asked the question that mattered most. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, turning back to face her, "you stay here, where I know exactly who is within 100 meters of you at any given moment. And I find out how Han Suk-jin knew you'd be alone in that office at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, because that is not information he should have had." "You think someone told him," she said. "I think," he said slowly, "that someone inside my own organization gave him your schedule. And I intend to find out who." The days that followed fell into a strange, new rhythm neither of them acknowledged out loud. Maya worked from the study each morning, forwarding what files she could access remotely, answering the calls that still needed answering, while outside the windows the security detail doubled, and then doubled again, Men in dark jackets rotating through the tree line with the disciplined boredom of people who took their jobs seriously enough to hope nothing ever happened on their watch. Taemin disappeared for long stretches, sometimes hours, sometimes most of a day, returning each time with his jaw a little tighter, his voice a little more clipped, though he never once raised it at her. On the third evening he came back late, his knuckles scraped raw across 2 fingers, a thin cut along his hairline that he clearly hoped she hadn't noticed. She noticed. "What happened?" she asked, meeting him in the hallway before he could disappear into the study. "Business," he said, which was not an answer, and kept walking. She followed him anyway, something she would not have done 8 months ago, back when her job description began and ended with calendars and correspondence. "Taemin," she said, and something about the way she used his given name, plain without title, made him stop. He turned to face her, and for a moment the careful architecture of his composure slipped, just slightly, just enough that she saw exhaustion underneath it, and something rawer than exhaustion. "I found the person who gave Han Suk-jin your schedule," he said. "It was someone I trusted for 6 years. Someone who sat 2 doors down from your office every single day." She felt her stomach drop. "Who?" she asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer would be a name she recognized, a face she had smiled at in the break room 100 times without a second thought. "It doesn't matter who," he said, which she understood, without him needing to explain further, meant the person no longer existed in any way that mattered to this conversation. "What matters is that they did it for money, not conviction, and that Park Yong-soo is paying very well right now for information about me. Which means this isn't over. It means it's just getting started." She should have been afraid. She was afraid, somewhere underneath the strange calm that had settled over her since the hospital, but standing in that hallway watching him try and fail to hide how much this had cost him, fear was not the loudest thing in the room. "You're bleeding," she said instead, nodding at the cut near his hairline. "It's nothing," he said. "Sit down," she said, and something in her tone, some flat, practical authority she didn't know she had until she used it, made him actually do it, lowering himself onto the bench near the window without argument. She did not touch the cut. She had learned enough about this world in 3 days to know that men like him did not want to be handled like something fragile, and some instinct told her the gesture that would matter more was simply staying, sitting across from him in silence, while Mrs. On's clock ticked somewhere down the hall, letting him exist for 5 minutes without needing to be in control of anything. "You didn't have to stay tonight," he said quietly after a while. "In the guest room. In this house at all. I would have arranged protection somewhere else if you'd asked." "I know," she said. "Why didn't you ask?" he said, and there was something almost unguarded in the question, something that made her realize he actually wanted the answer, that he was not simply making conversation to fill the silence. She considered lying, giving him something safe and professional about logistics and convenience. Instead, she told him the truth. "Because for the first time since Tuesday night," she said, "I don't feel like I'm waiting for something else to happen. I feel like I'm somewhere that's already decided to protect me. That's not nothing." He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable, the look of a man recalculating a variable he had assumed was fixed. "I don't say this often," he said finally. "I don't think I've said it in longer than I can remember. But you're the first person in years who has made me feel like something other than the man who runs this. Like a person, instead of a name people fear." The words landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there, heavier than she expected, and she did not know how to answer them. So for a moment, she simply let the silence hold both of them, unhurried, unafraid, the closest thing to peace either of them had touched since the stairwell. The message arrived 4 days later, delivered not by phone but by an envelope left inside the gate itself, slipped past a perimeter Taemin had trusted absolutely, and that fact alone told him more than the contents did. Inside was a single photograph, printed, no note attached, no signature needed. It showed Maya walking to her car outside her old apartment building, taken sometime in the past week, close enough to show the sling still on her wrist, close enough to prove someone had been standing near enough to touch her, and she had never known it. Taemin set the photograph on the desk and did not speak for almost a full minute. When he finally did, his voice had gone somewhere Maya had not heard it go before, quiet in a way that felt more dangerous than shouting ever could. "He's telling me he can reach you whenever he wants," he said. "This isn't about the docs anymore. This is about proving he can take something from me, and I can't stop him." She picked up the photograph herself, studied it with a steadiness that surprised even her. "When was this taken?" she asked.
"Tuesday," he said.
2 days after the hospital. 2 days after you'd already moved here. Which means someone is still watching my old building," she said, working through it out loud, "which means he knows I still have things there. My things. My mother's letters. Everything I didn't bring." "Don't," he said, sharp enough to make her look up. "Don't even think about going back for it." "I wasn't asking permission," she said, and something flared between them then, not quite an argument, something closer to two people recognizing, at the same moment, that they had both stopped pretending this was only about protection. "I can't lose someone else to this man," he said, quieter now, and the word someone landed with a weight that made clear he did not mean it in the abstract. "I already have a brother who nearly didn't survive dealing with him. I won't have you be the second." "I'm not your brother," she said. "I'm not going to sit in this house waiting to be the reason something happens to you either. If Park Yong-soo thinks I'm leverage, then I need to understand exactly what he's capable of, not be shielded from it like a child who can't handle the truth." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, respect and frustration tangled together in equal measure. "You are the most difficult person I have ever tried to protect," he said finally.
"Good," she said.
"Means I'm not going to get myself killed being naive about it." That night, unable to sleep, she found her way back to the study, and this time she did not wait for silence to fill the space between them. "Tell me the whole story," she said, sitting across from him. "Not pieces. All of it. What Park Yong-soo actually wants, and what he's capable of doing to get it." So he told her. He told her about the docks and the shipment routes worth more than most cities' annual budgets, about a truce that had held for 11 years because both sides understood the cost of breaking it, about his brother Jun-ho walking into a meeting 3 years ago believing peace was possible and walking out having signed away information that put half the organization's northern territory at risk, information Park had used slowly, patiently over years, to position himself for exactly this moment. He told her Park had waited because he was building something, not lashing out, that the attack on the office had been a test to see how Taemin would respond, and her survival of it had apparently told Park something he found useful, that Taemin's reaction had exposed a weakness Park intended to exploit. "You didn't cause this by existing," he said, seeing something in her face. "You didn't cause any of it. I need you to understand that because I can see you doing the math where you become the reason." "I'm not doing that math," she said, though the flicker of relief in his face told her he hadn't quite believed her either way. "What I am doing," she said, "is asking what you need from me to end this. Not protect me from it. End it." He studied her for a long time before he answered, and when he did, his voice had dropped into something low and certain, the voice she imagined he used only in rooms where the outcome mattered more than anything else being said. "I need to draw him out," he said. "And the only thing that will draw Park Yong-soo out of hiding fast enough to end this before he hurts anyone else is believing he already has what he wants." The plan took shape over the following 2 days in fragments Maya was only allowed to hear in pieces, a habit of Taemin she recognized now as protective rather than dismissive, though it frustrated her all the same. What she understood was this. Park Yong-soo believed Maya was valuable to Taemin in a way that made her useful as bait, and Taemin intended to use that belief against him, staging a meeting under the pretense of negotiating her safety in exchange for territory, drawing Park into a location Taemin controlled completely instead of one Park had chosen. "I don't like being the bait," she told him flatly, the morning he finally laid out the shape of it. "I don't like it either," he said. "I like the alternative less. Every version of this where I try to hide you indefinitely ends the same way, with him finding another angle, another photograph, another message left inside a gate that was supposed to be secure. This ends when he believes it's over, and the only way I can make him believe that convincingly enough is if you're in the room." She was quiet for a moment, turning the plan over, testing its edges for the places it might cut her. "And if something goes wrong in that room," she said, "what happens to me?" "Nothing," he said, and for the first time since the hospital his voice cracked slightly around the certainty of the word, just enough that she heard the fear underneath it. Nothing happens to you. I have made sure of every variable I can control, and the ones I can't, I have people watching regardless.
That's not a guarantee, she said.
No, he agreed. It isn't. I can't give you one. I can only tell you that I have never let anyone walk into a room I didn't already own 3 ways before they arrived, and I am not starting with you. She thought about her mother, 3 years gone now, who had raised her alone on a nurse's salary and taught her that fear was information, not a verdict, that the correct response to danger was rarely to freeze but to move with it, use it, let it sharpen you instead of hollow you out. She thought about the stapler leaving her hand in the office, the stairwell, the 11 minutes of silence before she'd finally called him. She had already survived one night she hadn't chosen. She decided, sitting there across from him, that she would rather walk into the next one with her eyes open than wait somewhere safe while other people decided her fate for her. I'll do it, she said. But I want to know exactly what my part is. All of it. No pieces this time. He told her. The meeting would take place at a restaurant Taemin's organization owned outright, in a private room wired with security his people had installed themselves rather than trusted to any outside vendor. She would sit beside him, silent, present, proof that she was unharmed and that the arrangement Park believed he was negotiating still had value. Somewhere in the building, men she would never see would be positioned to close every exit the moment Park's own people confirmed their presence, and the negotiation itself would be theater, a delay engineered to buy time for the real objective, which was locating and securing the physical evidence Park had used to blackmail Jun Ho 3 years earlier, evidence that, if recovered, would let Taemin end this permanently instead of simply surviving it. You're not just trying to protect me, she said, understanding arriving slowly. You're trying to finish something that's been open for 3 years. Both, he said. I won't pretend they're separate anymore. They stopped being separate the moment he sent that photograph. The night before the meeting, she found him in the study again, the security monitor behind him glowing faint blue against the dark, and this time, she did not sit across from him. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the desk itself, close enough that he had to look up at her instead of the folder in front of him. If something happens tomorrow, she said, I need you to know I don't regret any of this. Not the hospital, not staying here, not walking into that room with you tomorrow. I want that on the record before we do this. He set the folder aside slowly, and when he looked at her his eyes had lost whatever careful distance he usually kept behind them. I told myself keeping you here was survival, he said, the words coming out unhurried, deliberate, like each one had been chosen and reconsidered before he let it go. That it was practical, necessary. I've been lying to myself about that for 4 days, Maya, and I think you already know it. She did not move. Say it anyway, she said quietly. I don't know how to want anything the way I want this, he said. I have spent 11 years learning to want nothing I couldn't afford to lose. And then you were standing in that stairwell 4 days ago, and every rule I'd built my life around stopped mattering to me the instant I heard your voice on that call. The silence that followed was not empty. It held both of them, close and unhurried, until she reached out and closed the last distance between them herself, her hand finding the collar of his shirt, and he met her there without hesitation, the kiss slow and certain in a way that felt less like beginning, and more like something that had already been true for days, and was only now being said out loud. The restaurant sat on a quiet street in a district Maya had never had reason to visit, unmarked from the outside, the kind of place that existed for people who did not want to be noticed arriving or leaving. She wore a dress Mrs. On had produced without explanation, dark green, simple, chosen. Maya suspected, for how easily it would move if she needed it to. Her sling was gone by then, replaced with a brace she could remove in seconds, and she flexed her wrist once under the table as she sat down beside Taemin in the private room, testing the range of motion the way an athlete checks equipment before stepping onto a field. Park Yong-soo arrived 11 minutes late, a small man with an unhurried walk that suggested he had never once in his life felt the need to move quickly for anyone, flanked by 2 men Maya recognized instantly, the tattoo climbing one man's collar unmistakable even across the length of the room. Her pulse spiked and she forced it down, breathing the way Taemin had coached her the night before, in for 4 counts, hold, out for 6, until the room stopped tilting. Park sat without being invited to, which Maya understood, from the flicker in Taemin's jaw, was itself a small aggression. "This is the girl," he said, looking at Maya the way he might look at a piece of furniture he was considering purchasing.
"Pretty."
"I can see why you'd want to keep her intact." "Careful," Taemin said, his voice perfectly level, the kind of level that Maya had learned meant something dangerous was being held very tightly in check.
Park smiled, unbothered.
"Let's discuss terms," he said. "You return what belongs to me, the Northern Corridor, the shipment rights your brother so generously signed away and then tried to take back, and I forget any interest I ever had in your secretary. Simple."
"Clean."
"And if I decline," Taemin said. "Then I imagine we'll be having this conversation again," Park said, glancing at Maya, "except perhaps she won't be sitting quite so comfortably next time." Maya felt the threat land in her chest like a physical thing, and beneath the table her hand found the small device Taemin had given her that morning, a single button sewn discreetly into the lining of her clutch, its only purpose to signal the men positioned outside that the meeting had turned. She did not press it yet. Not yet, he had told her. "Only when I say the word, Cedar. It will mean everything after that happens fast, and I need you to trust the plan completely once it starts." The negotiation dragged through careful, coded language for nearly 20 minutes, Taemin stalling with the patience of a man who had done this 100 times before, asking for details, questioning terms, buying time while, somewhere else in the building, Maya knew, other men were moving through information Park did not yet realize had already been compromised. She watched Park's confidence sit on him like a coat he'd worn too long to notice its weight, watched him grow careless in small ways, a glance at his watch, a flick of his fingers toward one of his men, signals she wouldn't have caught a week ago and now read as clearly as sentences. Then Taemin said it. "Let's discuss the Cedar terms of the Northern Corridor specifically," he said, and Maya's hand moved before she had time to think about it. The button pressed once beneath the table, and the room changed so fast she barely had time to register the shift before Taemin's hand closed around her wrist and pulled her down and sideways, his body angling between her and the door in a single fluid motion that felt less like protection and more like instinct too old to be conscious. The doors opened from both sides at once. Everything after that happened the way violence happens when it is planned rather than accidental. Quick and economical, no wasted motion, Taemin's men moving through the room with a precision that made Park's own guards look clumsy by comparison. Maya, pressed low against the wall with Taemin's arms still braced across her, watched him step forward the moment the room's balance tipped decisively in his favor, watched him move toward Park with a controlled, deliberate stride that made every man still standing step back out of his path. "You sent a photograph of her to my gate," Taemin said, his voice quiet enough that Maya had to strain to hear it over her own pulse. "You made this personal the moment you did that." Park, cornered now, tried for the composure he'd walked in with and did not quite manage it. "It was business," he said. "Nothing more. It stopped being only business the moment you photographed a woman who has never once been part of this war," Taemin said. "Now it's something else entirely." What happened in the next several minutes moved too fast for Maya to track cleanly, but she was not merely a witness to it, and that mattered to her more than she expected it to. When one of Park's men broke from the group and lunged toward the doorway she and Taemin stood nearest to, she was the one who saw it first, who grabbed the heavy glass water pitcher from the table and swung it into the side of his head before he closed the distance, the impact jarring up through her sprained wrist hard enough to make her gasp, but the man went down and stayed down, and that was the only outcome that mattered. Taemin glanced back at her for half a second, something flashing across his face that was not quite surprise, more like recognition, the look of a man confirming something he had already suspected about her. Then he was moving again, and she understood, watching him, exactly what his men had meant when they spoke about him the way soldiers speak about a commander they trusted absolutely. He did not raise his voice once. He gave instructions in short, clipped phrases, and the room obeyed them the way a body obeys instinct. Park tried to run for the private room's second exit, the one Maya suspected he did not know had already been sealed from the outside, and he made it 3 steps before 2 of Taemin's men closed around him, not violently, simply immovable, the way a door closes rather than the way a fist does. Taemin crossed the room to stand in front of him, and the two men regarded each other for a long moment, 11 years of history compressed into the silence between them. "It's over," Taemin said. "Not the negotiation. All of it. I have the shipment records your people used to blackmail my brother 3 years ago. I have testimony from 2 of your own lieutenants who decided tonight that loyalty to you is no longer worth what it used to be. Whatever you thought you were building toward, Park, it ends in this room." Park's composure finally cracked, something bitter and cornered showing through. "You'll regret this," he said. "There will always be someone else." "Maybe," Taemin said. "But it won't be you, and it won't be tonight, and it will never again involve her." The aftermath moved with a strange, efficient calm, men speaking in low voices. Park let out through a service entrance by people who would deal with the details Maya understood she was not meant to ask about. She stood against the wall for a long moment after the room emptied, her hands finally beginning to shake now that there was nothing left requiring them to be steady, and Taemin crossed back to her immediately, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that felt almost unbearable after the violence that had just filled the room. "You're all right," he said, not quite a question, more like he needed to say it out loud to believe it. "I hit a man with a water pitcher," she said, and heard the slightly unhinged laugh that escaped her, adrenaline finally breaking loose from wherever she'd been holding it. "You saved my exit," he said. "That man was 3 seconds from getting behind me. I want you to understand what that means, Maya. You didn't just survive tonight. You changed what happened in this room." She looked up at him, at the composure finally slipping fully away from his face, replaced by something rawer and more honest than she had seen from him even in the study 4 nights ago. "I told you I wasn't going to sit somewhere safe while you handled this alone," she said. "I know," he said. "I don't think I'll ever ask you to again." Outside, the street was quiet, the city indifferent to what had just ended inside a nondescript building along its edge, and as they walked toward the car together, his hand finding hers without either of them deciding to make it happen, Maya understood that something fundamental had shifted, not just in the war that had apparently just ended, but in whatever this was between them, no longer deniable, no longer something either of them could pretend was only about protection. The days after settled into something neither of them had a name for yet, though both of them seemed to understand it did not require one. Maya returned to the office the following week, the reception desk repaired, the shattered monitor replaced, everything restored to the appearance of normal except for the 2 additional guards now stationed permanently near the elevator and the fact that she no longer flinched at every late footstep in the hallway, because she had learned, in the space of 9 days, that the fear of a thing and the reality of surviving it were not the same weight to carry. Taemin told her, 3 days after the restaurant, that Junho had called him for the first time in over a year, having heard through channels neither of them controlled that the evidence used against him had finally been recovered and destroyed. Taemin did not share the details of that call, but she watched something loosen in his shoulders the evening it happened, some old tension he had likely carried so long he had stopped noticing its weight, and she understood, without him needing to explain it, that this had cost him more than territory or leverage. It had cost him years of guilt he had never once mentioned out loud, and now, finally, some of it had been set down. She stayed at the mansion 2 more weeks before she finally admitted, one evening in the study that had become something like their place, that she did not actually want to go back to her old apartment, that the thought of the empty rooms there felt less like home now than the house on the hillside did. With Mrs. On's tea and the low hum of the security monitor and Taemin's voice reading through documents at midnight while she curled into the chair across from him with a book she rarely finished a page of, because she was too busy watching him instead. "I'm not asking you to stay because it's practical this time," he told her, the night she finally said it out loud. "I'm asking because the house feels wrong when you're not in it, and I have spent 11 years building a life I told myself needed no one, and I don't want that life back. I want this one, whatever this is, whatever we call it. I don't need it to have a name yet," she said. "I just need it to be real." "It's real," he said, and reached for her hand across the desk the way he had learned to, over these strange, dangerous, unexpected weeks, without hesitation now, without the careful distance that used to sit between them like a wall neither of them had built on purpose, but both of them had maintained out of habit. There would be more meetings, more territory to manage, more careful negotiations in rooms she would sometimes sit in, and sometimes not, because that was the nature of the life she had chosen to stay for, not naively, not blind to its dangers, but with her eyes fully open, the way her mother had taught her to face anything worth facing. There would be other threats eventually, because men like Park Yong-soo rarely existed in isolation, and empires like the one Taemin ran were never fully at peace for long. She understood that now in a way she had 9 days ago, understood it and chose it anyway because she had learned something in that stairwell and that hospital room and that private dining room that she suspected she would carry for the rest of her life. That safety was never really the absence of danger, it was choosing, deliberately, who stood beside you inside it. If you are still watching this, subscribe and share your thoughts below, because stories like Maya and Taemin's remind us that the deepest connections are often forged not in comfort, but in the moments we choose to stand our ground beside someone worth staying for. Let me know in the comments which moment hit you hardest, and I will see you in the next story.